Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wow Pakistan. My name is Safina Danish Elahi. I'm a writer and the founder of Reverie Publishers. The topic today is two fights in one, climate impact and gender injustice. According to Global Climate Index 2021, Pakistan is the eighth most affected country due to adverse impact of climate change, moving from the fifth. While this may seem like good news, this is something we call as code red, which is a climate emergency. Today, with our esteemed panelists, we are going to carry on this discussion. With us, we have Zofeen T. Ibrahim. She's a Karachi-based freelance journalist and a climate activist. She has been the editor of the Women's Zone magazine and the Third Pole. Also with us is Afia Salam, who is a freelance journalist and a development practitioner. She is the advocate of climate change and gender equality and has written about media ethics and labor rights. Also with us is Hamera Aisha, who works as a conservation manager at the WWF. She's working on initiatives focused on addressing coastal climate vulnerabilities with associated adaptation mechanisms for mangroves and mangrove-dependent communities in the Indus Delta, Pakistan. So let's start with you, Zofeen. You have extensively written about carbon emissions and climate hazards. What do you think Pakistan is in dire need of? What should we be talking about?
Hi, everyone, and Safina. Good to have you. Good to have you all, my esteemed panelists. So you asked me what is Pakistan in dire need of. Look, we cannot get away with the fact that there are climate catastrophes going on, and the fact that Pakistan plays a very minuscule part in triggering global warming. However, it seems that we will be fighting, and we have already started fighting on several fronts simultaneously. But it's our approach that is problematic. It's more of a firefighting than taking on the challenge of climate catastrophes. सोच समझ के हम नहीं कर रहे. We're doing it, not doing it holistically. So the problem is we think in silos and we forget to connect the dots. So for example, when we think of climate change, we will be facing in times to come, our foremost concern, I think, should be our runway population, a topic which seems to be sadly missing from our conversations. So while we will be facing temperature rising, we'll face heat waves, flash floods, all these will happen because we have no control over these. The impact on us, on Pakistanis, will be enormous. For example, today Pakistan is a water-stressed country. For this, we may build a string of reservoirs, and I'm not saying it's not a good thing. We do need those, those reservoirs. But in fact, we are facing receding Himalayan glaciers. We are also the monsoons are becoming variable, which is affecting the Indus water system. But that is really the solution of quenching the thirst of 200 million Pakistanis? Abito. Then it will become projected to be 262 million in 2030, and then 338 by 2050. So kahan tak hum reservoirs hi banate jayenge? We need to do something about our population. The other thing is that we have a huge youth bulge. Should we not be thinking of ways of turning the demographic disaster into a demographic dividend? So I think that we need to think a little bit more on those things, and then iske solutions bhi nikalne padenge, but wo ho jayenge.
Zofeen, आपको क्या लगता है कि where do you think the disconnect is? आपने जैसे अभी mention किया कि different जगह पे different research होती है, it's spoken about, but where do you think where does either the government or researchers, where do they need to connect on?
The dots, the policy making जब बनती है, they're made in. So अगर policy making climate change की कोई urban, for example, urban flooding पे कोई policy बन रही है, so are we taking the demography in mind? We're not. हम साइलोज में ही काम करते हैं. अगर हेल्थ कर रहा है तो हेल्थ डिपार्टमेंट कर रहा है, अगर पॉपुलेशन पे काम करें तो हेल्थ इज यूज्ड टू बी एक्सक्लूडेड एक्चुअली. अभी सिंध इज आई थिंक द ओनली प्रोविंस दैट इज merged population welfare and health together. But generally education, health, agriculture, they all need, they all need to be kind of coming together and making part in the policies, since we're talking about climate change here. So I think सबका रोल बनता है कि उसमें आप आएं और उसमें बात करें, and then come up with a more holistic way of dealing with the problem.
Of course. Thank you so much for that. Afia, आपके पास आते हुए, you have done considerable research on the subject as well, and you work as an advisor to organizations working with women's health in communities such as the ones in Thar Parker, where women have very minimal access to healthcare and clean water. Can you share your experience working with these communities?
So thank you so much for having me on this panel. And I think the expertise of the panelists or the areas of interest, they all intersect. And like Zofine is saying, the question you have asked me also has a connect to climate change. Because as it is, you mentioned, the lack of resources. Some resources are human provided, but some are from, dependent on nature. Mm-hmm. And the social status of women generally, and also specifically in communities like Thar Parker, that they are the center of everything that goes on in a household. And yet, in the decision-making process or the big decisions, not just at the household level, the policy making, they're nowhere there. So we don't see the solutions that are being provided with them being kept at the center. Now, one problem that Zofine has pointed out is the population explosion that we are experiencing. And, that is like the elephant in the room in all the policy making conversations, except the one which is specifically focusing on population welfare. And this is where the problem is, because when you're there are people who are designing infrastructure, mega cities, mega projects, smart cities. What will it have for the women? Not just for the women of Thar Parker, but for the women generally in Pakistan, even in supposedly affluent cities. Our cities aren't really, those centers of affluence which people generally think. So when we see it is the role of women in the social jigsaw puzzle, which drives many of their vulnerabilities. I'll give you one example. In Thar Parker, the health access, because it is a big district and the population is very, very scattered. So the access to health, of course, and it has been, it has one of the lowest human development indexes in Pakistan. I think it's the second last as far as all those HDI are concerned. And the access or not having access to health or even health counseling, we are seeing a growing number of problems which are not just related to physical health. There's a lot of mental health issues that are now being seen. And, when you see the number of suicides that are taking place. So when we speak of health, let's not just, focus on sexual reproductive health or other primary or tertiary healthcare facilities, but also the role of women, the status of women. How is it affecting their mental capabilities to cope with the difficulties that they are burdened with from day to day, responsibilities, as well as the social responsibilities, which dictate the way they live. They are bearing children for all their reproductive life. Don't know how many survive, don't know how many die. So what is that toll that takes not just on a woman's body and health, but on her mental makeup, on her emotional health. And then, of course, the climate change kicks in, and that will mean, maybe lack of further degradation of the habitat, and the resource equity will become more and more skewed as far as the access of women to services is concerned. So, it's a very, very difficult thing unless and until you focus on women from a holistic angle. What about women's health? What about her access to services? What about her education? What about her mental health? What about the role she can play instead of just being a reproductive machine? And wherever those opportunities have been provided, the women have actually shown by, and in that I mean SHONE, shown. They've shown in every field that they have been allowed to, participate in. And this is true of the women I see in Thar. This is true of the women I see in Lower Sindh, which is another area where we work with the other organization I volunteer with. I see it here in my city. I see it across Pakistan, actually. Wherever women have been provided, the road blocks have actually been removed. Let me not say provided opportunities. In many of the places, women have actually arrested those opportunities. So yeah, we need to focus on how to make an enabling environment for women to function to the fullest capacity.
Afia, do you think that cultural factors also play a role here in terms of women getting access to information? कि ख़वातीन को इजाज़त ही नहीं होती, उनके शौहर से पूछे बगैर निकला जाए घर से, या कोई impact of climate change. They don't know what's going on in their own communities. Do you think there are cultural factors that affect that as well?
Absolutely. So, I mean, all the things that I have cited earlier, it is all cultural. Because, well, the Constitution gives us equal status. It is the culture that doesn't give us that equal status. So on that score, yes, definitely. It's a very patriarchal setup everywhere. And does not matter what the law, the Constitution says, the implementation, you go to any department, you see in the decision-making power places, you will see men. And men who are actually unable, to even perceive the kind of things that women go through. You have to have women in places of decision-making so they can articulate those the issues that they face almost on a daily basis. So absolutely, it is cultural. It is cultural.
Definitely. I mean, I completely agree that women need to, obviously in that situation, unke paas wo control hai hi nahi. Magar jab tak decision makers, khawaateen nahi hongi, tab tak, I think women's problems cannot be addressed, at the same level.
आपने जो सवाल किया कि क्लाइमेट चेंज के जो इम्पैक्ट्स आएंगे उनको कैसे पता चलेगा, और इन्फॉर्मेशन का आपने लफ्ज इस्तेमाल किया था, तो as far as Pakistan is concerned, as teledensity, it is one of the biggest footprint. All across Pakistan now there are cell phone coverages. There are very, small patches, maybe in parts of Balochistan or other areas where it's not possible for those companies to set up their towers. But when you look at the figures, there's a very, very clear gender bias of women's accessibility to cell phones. Why is that? That is also cultural. It is that mindset that why should women, have an access where they may be able to do something that they're not allowed to do. So that the whole concept of allowing women access to
ijazat is vested, because it's a patriarchal structure. Ijazat hi unhone hold on ki hui hai, to then there's not much decision making in their power then.
So this is where it happens, when you say that women need to be given their rights. The rights are there, the rights are inherent. And the rights are also enshrined in your constitution, which is equally applicable to men and women. But jo ijazat lene ya dene wala mamla hai, that is where all the problem lies. That needs to be unlocked.
Definitely. Humaira, coming to you, your role at the WWF gives you access to information regarding dependent communities in coastal areas. How do you think women are impacted disproportionately?
Thank you so much, Safina, and it's a pleasure to be with this panel. All are women, all are very strong in their fields, so always a pleasure to be part of this panel. Afia has started with some very beautiful information, and I think she's covered pretty much everything which was required to talk about in terms of how disproportionate system exists when it comes to gender. And coastal communities are usually those communities who have a very strong link to the nature because they catch fish, they have a reliance on agriculture. So everything in their life is linked to nature, either its livelihood or life support system. And for women, especially, this is become more specific because It's the multidimensional role they play in that society. As the person who supports the nature-dependent livelihood, as a person who runs a family, as a person who even fetches water from very far away. So this brings them to the center of this environmental resources linked the system there they look. खवातीन जो है वो एग्रीकल्चर को भी मैनेज करती हैं. अब उसमें प्रॉब्लम ये होता है कि when we talk about vulnerabilities, and Afia did mention it already, somehow we start to describe climate change vulnerability as a different science. What we kind of miss out is that we are talking about a society, those systems and those communities where there is already a nuisance exist which does not let the gender equality and equity prevail. There are cultural challenges, there are limitations in terms of what you could do. There are also political, economical situations for various contexts. Especially, you know, in the coastal areas, and again, Afia has given a good example of Tharparkar, which is again one of the most important area in terms of natural resources, but also the rural scarcity. वो जब वो disproportionate आपके पास already exist कर रहा है, and then you bring in climate change, so it just becomes an added factor. But what happens is that you're already dealing with a group which is undermined, which is already struggling. So their struggle just become more and more, you know, like more and more severe over the time. And I think that is really important, that, you know, we should really talk about vulnerabilities in the context of what happens to the gender and what becomes more sensitive when climate change become a really, really evident and its impact. And so are with the responses. Indus Delta is a good example, again, to quote from the coast of Pakistan, where, you know, communities are really living in those areas which are really close to nature. लेकिन कोस्ट लाइन पे जब बैठे हैं तो यू आर वेरी वेरी वल्नरेबल टू ऑल द साइक्लोन्स, ऑल द disasters and, you know, extreme weather events which could have made your life difficult. It affects everyone, but for women it's even challenging because you have to have, if there is more salinity, if there is more and more land intrusion, a sea intrusion, तो आपको घर छोड़ के जाना है. So migration would affect everyone, but women differently, because now you have to leave a home, you have to settle in somewhere, you have to start from somewhere. दूसरा aspect which is also really important, that is the perceived role of men and women that we have in our society. So no matter मर्द से you expect that he is the breadwinner for the family, so you understand कि वो जाएगा कमा करके लाएगा, but often this is not the case for women. Women अगर बहुत सारा काम कर भी रही होती हैं, but that role always stays on the support side. So she does it, it's fine, but she can never be recognized as a person who does it to support the family in the leadership role. So this brings in a lot of value. जैसे जो FAO है वो ये कहती है कि पूरी दुनिया के अंदर इस वक्त फिश प्रोसेसिंग इंडस्ट्री के अंदर there are 80 to 90% women who are involved in processing, but they are often working on a very low pay scale, you know, with limited recognition, and many, I think there is just hardly a couple of women who are running their own businesses. अब fisheries dependent communities अगर आप देखें तो women we are often considering that, you know, there are always men at the sea who are catching fish and they are bringing it back and we are eating, and this is how the supply chain works. But women have a very important role to play in managing the fisheries pre harvest or post harvest के बाद. So when this role gets undermined over time, so definitely you don't prioritize to support the women. अब अगर क्लाइमेट चेंज की वजह से घर चेंज होगा, अगर आपको you have to migrate, or if you don't have enough resources, so there is a high chance for you to take your kids out of school. But the probability of a girl not going back to the school is really, really high in comparison to what you would expect from a boy. अब क्लाइमेट चेंज ये प्रॉब्लम भी करेगा कि जहां से पानी पहले आप, वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट द पीपल हु डोंट इवन हैव एक्सेस टू बेसिक एमिनिटीज, शी स्टिल हैज टू वॉक so many kilometers away to fetch water, which is basically a rain fed source, and in many cases they'll have to purchase it. But पहले अगर वो 3 किलोमीटर चलती थी तो अब शायद उसको 10 किलोमीटर भी चलना पड़ेगा. So the labor has gone double, but that particular role hasn't been recognized and rewarded that way. Healthcare, for example, and Afia did mention a very good example already. Now, those are the people who are already living at the verge of, you know, not having access to anything. But if there is a cyclone hits and the infrastructure gets destroyed, तो शायद एक dispensary तो आराम से बन जाएगी, लेकिन women की maternity healthcare unit बहुत जल्दी नहीं बनी. So those are those challenges which are putting gender-specific vulnerabilities to an advanced level. And we are still a country who are still deciding to as of what kind of action plan we need to develop to address gender specific issues in climate change mitigation and management strategies. So hence we are really far away, and we understand that women have a very specific role because it is established from studies, it is established from the practices that unless you bring women into the policy making, into the decision making process, you cannot even make the management of natural resources really, really important and sustainable. But here, women always stay as one of those stakeholders who are never brought into the light as a major decision maker. और उससे फिर यही होता है कि उसके जो असरात हैं they affect women because women are not into the role where they could engage and support in terms of what do they want that could support to address their challenges.
Bilkul, bilkul. That was very enlightening, Humaira. Coming back to you, Zophine, according to a review of 130 studies by the Global Gender and Climate Alliance in 2016, women are again more likely to suffer food insecurity as a result of the climate crisis. And following extreme weather events, women are also more likely to experience mental health, as Afia also mentioned earlier, and partner violence. Where do we start fixing this?
देखो, climate change affects everyone, ठीक है? But its impact on men and women is different, and women are affected disproportionately more. And this has been Afia ne ye kaha, Humaira ne ye kaha, and I'm also saying the same. So, for example, there have been in Pakistan, at least, when migration happens due to climate crisis, it's often that men leave the village and women have to take on more responsibilities, which means there's a lot more stress on them, and the stress is increasing and will increase further. ये खत्म नहीं होने वाला, because उनकी वो जो already they were burdened with so much work, अब और भी ज्यादा बढ़ गया है, because अब उनको वो वाले भी काम करने पड़े थे जो men कर रहे थे, उनके घर के men किया करते थे, वो भी इनके हिस्से में आ गया है. But women are uniquely placed to be agents of change, and because of this very reason, because they are impacted the most by climate crisis. तो जैसे Humaira ने कहा कि अगर आप मुझे पूछते हैं कि how can we fix this, my answer is very simple. It's you have to put women on the table where the plans, decisions, and solutions are being developed. Because वो उनसे तो पूछे ना. Humaira ने आप simple एक चीज कही कि when there is a climate crisis, when healthcare या BHU आपका गिर जाता है, they will construct a BHU, but they never think. It's not that they don't want, it's they never think that कि women की needs थोड़ी सी different है. उनके लिए maternity home या that part that where women can do birthing stations are necessary. So, but they never think, because ये सारे plans मर्द बना रहे हैं, उनको बुलाया ही नहीं जाता. जो उस एरिया के लोग हैं, उनको उनमें से औरतों को तो बुलाया ही नहीं जाता कि what are your needs. So I think very briefly, this is the main reason I would say that unless we bring women to the fore, we bring them, we ask them, and we should never think that they don't know, because they know very well what they want. ठीक है, उनकी लैंग्वेज डिफरेंट होगी, हो सकता है उनको आपको थोड़ा प्रॉड करना पड़े कि आपको क्या चाहिए है, and then wait and listen, and they will have a big list of things that has not been thought of. So, I mean, this is what I think. As far as what you were talking about, mental health, I recently did a story, and I don't know if we have time, but let me just dilate a little bit on it, that I did a story on how mental issues have cropped up due to climate disasters. I wrote the story from Badswat, which is in Gilgit-Baltistan. वहाँ पे आते जा रहे हैं, उस एरिया में flooding होती जा रही है, and people are losing land, people are losing their homes. Now, when I was writing the story, I asked the वहाँ का जो healthcare का बंदा था, who was basically a basic healthcare provider, not even a doctor. And he said, मुझे नहीं पता क्या करें, but ये बहुत ज़्यादा परेशान है, यहाँ की औरतें बहुत परेशान हैं. All they think of, they go to that place where their home has been submerged into the lake, and they only just sit there and they say कि हमें हमारा घर वापस दिला दो. Now that घर is not coming back. So I try to talk to people, the big psychologists and psychiatrists here, कि मुझे बताएं, हम सबको बताएं, mental health and climate crisis was never like, brought as a subject. And मुझे भी नहीं कभी सूझा था. This was the first time I was writing, and all of them told me that we don't know what to tell you. We can't. We have never thought of it. So but these climate catastrophes are going to happen more and more, and we need to think of ways. And some of the areas are so remote that अगर हमारे disaster relief के लिए लोग जाते भी हैं, अगर doctors भी जाते हैं, they're not equipped to handle these stresses and they call them depressions and PTSD. So we need to come up with quick solutions, या हम वहाँ के हेल्थ केयर जो जाते हैं उनको ट्रेन करें for basic thing कि किस तरह से उनको करना है. One of the person who'd been working in that area for a very very long time on women's health, he said कि मुझे तो एक ही solution, he's not a doctor, he was not an expert, he said मुझे एक ही solution आता है, उनको please यहाँ से उठा लें, because this is the only thing they can think of, and they're not coming out of their sorrow. They're in so much pain, so much sorrow, and I'm talking about mental stress since you mentioned. So, but itna feel hua that we never think of women in that way. I mean, I'm sure men are also going through it. It's not just, it's everyone. Children are probably going through it also when you lose a home, which is down 100 feet in the lake. But women are reaching out, but we're not helping them.
It's very, breaks my heart to hear all of this as well. एक और चीज जो मैं mention करना चाह रही थी वो थी partner violence. Do you think this is obviously climate change की वजह से there's loss of livelihood? Do you think that aggression trickles down on in terms of partner violence? क्या कितने cases हम सुनते हैं वो? How can we connect that to climate change? It may be loss of livelihood, I guess, for the men there, and that's how they deal with their aggression.
Safina,
It just trickles down.
there has been a study by Dr. Nausheen Anwar and a few other people. They did it recently, where some people, people had migrated from urban to rural, and वहाँ पे urban में rural में ये था कि वो औरत को देखते थे पानी लाने के लिए. अब जब वो urban slums में आए, तो उन्होंने देखा कि हम अपनी औरतों को पानी लेने कहाँ भेजेंगे, and this is a new place for them, this whole new dynamics of living in a city. So, and they had to look for work, then women were not adjusting to this. So udhar pata chala, they did a study and they found out that not only in Karachi but in Pindi and I think another city, I think 3 cities kiya thi, 4 cities ki thi, I forget, Afia would know. So उधर उन्होंने देखा कि violence हो रहा है. Men were not able to manage this new system of living in ये छोटी कच्ची आबादीज में. वहाँ जहाँ से वो आए थे वहाँ पे तो एक जो village होता है, it's like a family. यहाँ पे they are living within strange people. फिर वहाँ पे आप औरतों को जाने नहीं दे रहे हैं, फिर कहते हैं हम लेके आएंगे पानी कहाँ से लेके आ रहे हैं. So all those dynamics, that things had changed so much, and they hadn't changed in that pace because they were coming from the village. तो ये चीजें हुई हैं, बहुत हुई हैं. And वैसे भी if you look at if all of us don't, I mean होता हम, maybe we're not सब violent तो नहीं हो जाते, but when you are stressed, there are chances that anger comes out in different ways. And obviously, the most vulnerable gets the brunt of it. And यहाँ पे भी औरत ही brunt उठाती हैं ये violence का भी men पे जो perpetrators हैं. So yes.
I mean, it's so interesting to see कि देखिए कहाँ से कहाँ तक connection बनता है. कि वहाँ से climate change, उसके बाद से loss of livelihood, migration से violence वैसे ही हमारे मुल्क में काफी because of other cultural aspects हो जाती है. तो this also just adds on on the women's shoulders. I mean, it's just really sad कि ये connection बना के भी हम pretty much उसी जगह पहुंच जाते हैं. Again, we disproportionate impact on the women, their mental health, their physical health. So coming to you, Afia, Research has been conducted by Arrow in since 2000 for 2010 flooding. It was reported that disasters left the worst impact on women's health. Again, हम बार-बार disaster में भी उधर ही आ रहे हैं कि जब कोई खुदा ना खास्ता सैलाब या कोई भी coastal overload होता है, तो उसमें भी access to food security, reproductive health, experience psychological stress during the flood, in camps. ये भी एक बड़ी इम्पोर्टेंट बात है कि जो कैंप्स में है रिहैबिलिटेशन कैसे होती है, उसमें भी कितनी रिसोर्सेज आर टेकन टू द वुमेन एंड which gender is preferred there and what kind of rehabilitation is actually done. So would you like to comment on that a bit?
Definitely, because I worked in the 2010 floods in the area of Sujawal and Badin. For relief, rehabilitation, all of that. And I saw that, again, which I probably will be repeating myself in saying that there's no thought that goes on that women's needs are different. Women need to be dealt with different. They need some other. So even in the relief kits, there was nothing of female hygiene that was being given. It is something so basic, which if a woman was heading the relief operations or not heading, even was there on the table, like Zofine said, she would have pointed it out कि आप दाल चावल चीनी वगैरह तो डाल रहे हैं, लेकिन इसमें और भी किसी चीज की जरूरत है, बेसिक जरूरत है. अच्छा, वहां पे इस हद तक हो गया था पानी, क्योंकि 6-6 महीने तक खड़ा रहा था, स्पेशली इन बदीन, बिकॉज बदीन इज लाइक अ कप. वो पानी वहां पे खड़ा हो गया था. And the way, the reason why it flooded, not just because there were of the extraordinary precipitation, was because there was no drainage. So the women were just there. उनकी hygiene का आप खुद सोचें, वो कहीं जा नहीं सकती थी. जो camps से वो they were just along the roads because it was like a cup, so they couldn't move further inland, so they were just sitting alongside the roads. दूसरी जो चीज है कि जैसे अभी जोफी ने जिस रिपोर्ट का हवाला दिया है, डॉक्टर नौशीन, डॉक्टर दानिश मुस्तफा, अमीरा सवैस, they did that report. They did it urban violence because related to water, and it is simply because जब आप जैसे कैंप में आप होते हैं, उसमें आपके इर्द गिर्द आपके खानदान वाले नहीं होते, जहाँ पे आप फ्रीली आप निकल सकते हैं बाहर, और वो किसी तफरी के लिए कोई नहीं निकल रहा होता. वो सब काम कराने के लिए ही औरत को बाहर जाने की इजाजत, एज यू मेंशन, दी जाती है. बकरी चलाना के लिए वो घर से निकलती है, तो दैट्स एब्सोल्युटली फाइन विद एवरीबडी. पानी लेने जाती है तब भी किसी को कोई उसमें बेपर्दगी महसूस नहीं होती है. खेतों में भी काम कराते हुए उनकी कोई इज्जत के ऊपर हर्फ नहीं आता है किसी भी उनके घर वालों की. Dare she have any, even a wish for recreation या relaxation, उसके लिए जरा बाहर निकले तो फिर वहां इजाजत kicks in. So all these things confine women into such a small space, जहाँ उनकी अपनी physical health, mental health, बच्चों का problem, reproductive उनकी जो health है वो इतनी compromise हुई कि उनके लिए वो reproductive services जो कि camps तक होनी चाहिए थी, disaster में जब सब कुछ उजड़ जाता है तो उनका access to the places which were functioning वो बहुत मुश्किल हो गया. So ये चीजें हैं. दूसरी चीज, जैसे हमारा ने कहा कि हमारे यहाँ डिस्प्रोपोर्शनेट रेडीनेस भी है औरतों की. मर्द के लिए रेडीनेस और किस्म की है. अब कोस्टल कम्युनिटीज का हमारा ने अगर जैसे जिक्र किया है, तो आप मुझे बताएं, अगर इवन एक सर्ज आती है, वेव सर्ज, चले मैं बहुत बड़ी कोई ना सुनामी की बात करूंगी, ना मैं स्टॉर्म्स की बात करूंगी, साइक्लोन्स की बात करूंगी, हाउ मेनी ऑफ द वुमेन हैव यू सीन स्विमिंग? तो उसमें से कौन बचेगा फिर? दोज हु नो हाउ टू स्विम. So this is a very clear disproportionate impact. मैं अगर सिर्फ इसे एक कम्युनिटी की बात कर रही हूँ, ठीक है ना. So this is it. अच्छा, दूसरी चीज इसमें अब लिंकेजेस हैं. आप बेशक उसका अम्ब्रेला आप क्लाइमेट चेंज का आप बना दीजिए, लेकिन उसके नीचे तमाम चीजें जो हैं, they are all linked to each other. Women are considered weak. I'm not talking of the character, कि वो चीजों से वो ज्यादा जल्दी घबरा जाती हैं, कहते हैं इनको रोना जल्दी आ जाता है वगैरह. that's a mental makeup that they came with. Why are they weak? न्यूट्रिशन में उनके क्या प्रेफरेंस होती है? Who gets to eat the best food? Who becomes physically more able-bodied? So उसमें भी अगर उनको अगर आपका कोई एक कॉल आती है आपकी इवैक्यूएशन की, रैपिड इवैक्यूएशन की, who will be able to run and access a safer ground? वो तो उनमें हो सकता है जो औरतें प्रेग्नेंट हो, वो क्या उतनी तेजी से उस जगह को एक्सेस कर सकेंगी? या जो औरतें physically weak because of lack of better nutrition for them, and they have grown up weak क्योंकि उनकी nutrition के ऊपर बचपन से ही इतनी तवज्जो नहीं दी जाती थी, वो तो differently impacted हुई ना फिर. अच्छा, फिर एक और चीज है, जैसे अगेन अगर हम कोस्टल कम्युनिटीज की तरफ देखते हैं, तो जब मर्द जाते हैं फिशिंग के लिए, तो वो कई कई हफ्ते बल्कि महीनों का राशन लेके साथ में जाते हैं. Many of those, and in the poorer coastal communities, मैं वो बड़े ट्रॉलर ओनर की बात नहीं कर रही, they take a lot of loan, you know, to fill their boats up with the rations and go. And when they are gone, and if they don't return on the time when they are supposed to, because this is, you know, nature, आपको कहीं fish नहीं मिली, आप और आगे गए और आगे गए, the loan sharks are the ones who come and harass these women. They have to cough up the money somehow or the other. तो उनकी जिंदगी के लिए वो भी है. So if they step out of the house to go get some resources to be able to pay back those loan sharks, then there is of course all the other cultural barriers, the harassment and everything, low pay, you're not paid equal for the equal work. So कोई एक मसला नहीं है, you know, I know it sounds like a sort of a कोई रोना पीटना about women, but these are real issues that they face. There are very, very few women, you know, who are treated just because they are a woman and they are given equal treatment. नहीं, वो बहुत struggle से वो आई है कुछ organized sector में, कि अगर corporate यानी अगर आपका grade 1 है, grade 1 में औरत को भी उतनी तनख्वाह मिलेगी और मर्द को भी उतने मिलेगी. बाकी जगहों पे negotiated होती हैं आपकी payments, and a woman is not given the same amount for the same amount of work. So, you know, there are all these things. So when a so let's just keep climate change aside first, and we see of these the culturally triggered inequities of women and the status, etc. And उसके ऊपर फिर आप layer climate change की डालें और उसके साथ जो attendant problem है. So whatever the women are going through is going to be exacerbated. But that's the only thing that I can link. The exacerbation of the existing marginalization, of the existing vulnerabilities, is what I can pin at the door of climate change.
Yeah, bilkul, I mean, 100% agree on all of that you said, because देखिए, जब खवातीन में इन्वेस्टमेंट ही नहीं होगी, उसकी एजुकेशन में इन्वेस्टमेंट नहीं है, उसकी हेल्थ में इन्वेस्टमेंट नहीं है, उसको खाना भी बराबर नहीं दिया जाता, तो हाउ कैन दैट वुमन देन कम आउट एंड कम्पीट? वो तो कंपटीशन ही आपने इतना आपने ले लिया उनसे कि वो कम्पीट ही नहीं कर पाती कहीं पे भी. और जहां हम फेमिनिज्म की भी बात करते हैं, तो when we ask for equal opportunities, when we ask for equal pay, तो उस वक्त लगता है कि ये कोई नाजायज रिक्वेस्ट हो रही है कि वो लोग मर्द को ज्यादा एबिलिटीज हैं, ज्यादा टैलेंट्स हैं, ज्यादा पढ़े लिखे हैं. सो अगेन विद द क्लाइमेट चेंज लेंस, इट्स अगेन फिर से डिस्प्रपोर्शनेट इम्पैक्ट होता है, और शुरू ही डिस्प्रपोर्शनेट हुआ है, आई गेस. इन्वेस्टमेंट भी ही जब नहीं होगी. हमेरा, कमिंग टू यू नाउ, अब हमने सारी बात तो कर ली कि इम्पैक्ट भी डिस्प्रपोर्शनेट है, हम डिसएडवांटेज भी हैं सारी कम्युनिटीज. हाउ डू वी एम्पावर वुमेन देयर? व्हाट स्टेप्स कुड बी टेकन जिसमें उनको इंफॉर्मेशन एक्सेस हो? आई मीन, कल्चरल बैरियर्स ब्रेक तो नहीं हो सकते इतना जल्दी, ऑब्वियसली जनरेशनल है, बट हाउ कैन हेल्प बी फॉरवर्डेड टू देम?
थैंक यू सफीना. आई थिंक इसमें मैं ज़ुफीन की बात रिट्रेट करूंगी जो इन्होंने शुरू में हाईलाइट की थी कि लेट्स नॉट कंसिडर क्लाइमेट चेंज अ सेपरेट इशू. Let's not consider climate change as something that needs gender consideration just for the sake of addressing climate change. Climate change हर उस चीज के साथ जुड़ा हुआ है जो किसी तरह हमारी लाइफ्स को और लाइफ सपोर्ट सिस्टम को चला रही है. It could be water sector, it could be agriculture sector, it could be fisheries sector, it could be access to basic health care, education. You name the sector, and climate change is impacting everything in one way, and also the communities and people who are linked to it, particularly gender के lens के अगर आप देखें. So how do we basically start? So अगर आप sustainable development goals को देखें, that's the roadmap that we have put forward in front of us as the agenda that we need to achieve to make this world a better place. So this clearly brings the gender perspective into light. अगर I think 5 goal है, But then the SDGs also gives you a roadmap under different goals to as of how do we do it. So सबसे पहली बात तो ये है कि हमें शायद अब उस स्टेज से निकल के थोड़ा ऊपर जाने की जरूरत है कि जहां आज भी हम कुछ स्टीरियोटिपिक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज और इश्यूज डिफाइन कर रहे हैं फॉर वुमेन इन आवर पॉलिसीज एंड इट्स अ डायलेमा. बट अगर आप देखें तो इंटरवेंशंस भी हम बड़ी टिपिकल और कल्चरल स्पेसिफिक नॉर्म्स के लिए बनाते हैं. खवातीन के लिए बीबी के घर में चूल्हे का क्या करेंगे जी, बीबी के घर में जी ये बच्चों की वैक्सीनेशन करा देंगे. सो वो एंड लाइक आफिया रियली राइटली पॉइंटेड आउट कि वो फिर क्या जब स्विमिंग नहीं वो सीख सकेगी एंड शी स्टिल लिविंग एट दैट कोस्टल कम्युनिटी, तो हाउ डू वी ब्रिज दैट इशू? So the policies need to be really specific, and I think of gender equity is one thing that must be recognized. पॉलिसीज अगर हम बनाएंगे भी और पॉलिसीज हम बनाते भी आए हैं, बट पॉलिसीज क्यों नहीं वो चेंज ला रही, दैट इज वन एस्पेक्ट टू लुक एट. अब हम उसके बाद आते हैं इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के ऊपर. Each site is unique, and with the experience that I have had working on different areas in Pakistan, आपका पर्सपेक्टिव विलेज टू विलेज भी चेंज होता है. किसी कम्युनिटी के अंदर शायद आपको थोड़ी ओपननेस मिले, किसी कम्युनिटी के अंदर वो औरत को मार देंगे अंदर डाल के, लेकिन उसको लेकर के नहीं जाएंगे. एंड देन ओपननेस इज डिफरेंट. सो हाउ डू यू address that as a general issue कि पानी लाना औरत की जिम्मेदारी है, लेकिन अगर वो 10 किलोमीटर से लाती है और 3 किलोमीटर से लाती है तो this brings in a lot of challenge. आप स्टडीज देखें that has published and they have linked how women's health have deteriorated because they carry water from really really long distances. So that's one aspect to like really look at where there is a gap between policy planning and implementation. Then and other I think दोनों panelists ने बड़ी खूबसूरती से इसको पहले भी highlight किया है that how do we like really ensure कि women voices are heard. आज हम 3 लोग यहाँ बात कर रहे हैं, शायद कुछ साल पहले हम भी ना बैठे होते ना. So something has happened to bring that change. But अब उस change को trickle down करने पे उस level पे those who are really affected because again they both were very right to say कि जी उनको सब पता होता है. जो local solutions are the best solutions because they are the people who experience it, they face it. तो कैसे उनकी voices को we bring it to the point कि जहाँ policy makers भी सुने, आपकी रीजनल लेवल पे भी सुने, इंटरनेशनल लेवल पे भी सुने, that becomes really instrumental. एंड वो कम्युनिटी वॉइसेस शायद अभी वुमेन स्पेसिफिक वॉइसेस बननी जरूरी है. So then how do you bring those women heroes in the communities who are able and who are supporting and they are capable enough, तो वो ऊपर लाने की बहुत ज्यादा जरूरत है. और इसमें आई थिंक हर प्लेटफॉर्म का रोल बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है. वाओ इज वन सच प्लेटफॉर्म, बट व्हाट वुड हैव बीन नाइस दैट मे बी अगले वाओ प्लेटफॉर्म में देयर विल बी वुमेन हु विल बी टॉकिंग ऑन बिहाफ सिटिंग हियर एंड एड्रेसिंग दैट चैलेंज दैट दे फेस. उसके बाद अगर आप देखें तो जेंडर वल्नरेबिलिटीज हमारे रिसर्च के कैनोपी में अभी भी एक लिमिटेड स्कोप का काम रहा है. हमें नहीं पता कि क्या कितना अफेक्ट हो रहा है चाइल्ड मैरिजेस को एक्सेलरेट करने में इन वल्नरेबिलिटीज पे. वो कम्युनिटीज जो डिस्प्लेस होती हैं, वो आदमी जिसकी कश्ती जो है अब वो इस काबिल नहीं है किसी साइक्लोन के बाद कि वो मछली पकड़े, डज दैट नॉट रियली इनकरेज हिम कि चलो बेटी को जल्दी शादी कर दो ताकि फैमिली का एक बर्डन कम हो. जब हम डिजास्टर के प्लान्स बनाते हैं या वो हम रिसोर्सेज देते हैं तो बंदे को तो हम मोबाइल फोन दे देते हैं, लेकिन बीबी के लिए अमूमन हम कुछ भी नहीं देते. अगर हम ऑल्टरनेटिव लाइवलीहुड्स लाते हैं तो यूजुअली देयर इज अ डिफाइंड रोल दैट दिस इज व्हाट अ वुमन शुड डू. सो हाउ डू वी शिफ्ट दैट बैरियर एंड ऑल्सो ब्रिंग द अपॉर्चुनिटीज टू वुमेन वेयर because there are evidences which tells you that women are really important manager and support group for every decision making process, and especially in the nature linked areas. Or unfortunately, on all the areas where you have women facing vulnerability to a greater proportion are also the area where you have the precious natural resources. So we can't just simply manage those natural resources unless we have women playing a very important role at the decision making level that could support into that. So मैं यहाँ रुक जाती हूँ, and other panelists I think could also add to this further.
नहीं बिल्कुल हुमैरा, but I had actually a leading question to it. Are there initiatives taken by the WWF that you'd like to discuss, regarding the matters that we've been discussing at this conversation? अगर कोई है तो आप please share करें.
There are two really interesting examples जो मैं यहाँ पे quote करूँगी, and probably Afia is also aware of it. So recently, in past couple of years, we've started basically talking about the same issues. कि जी आप किसी से जाके vulnerability पूछो तो my definition of vulnerability being a researcher or Afia's definition would be very different to what a woman would tell you. So हम बदीन में ऐसे ही सर्वे कर रहे थे, तो we spoke to one of the females जिसका ये एग्रीकल्चर का वाला था, तो उनसे पूछा जी आपके कितने बच्चे हैं, तो उसने जवाब दिया मेरी 3 बेटियां हैं। तो वी सेड कि हाउ इज इट, कि आपको क्या इफेक्ट हुआ है क्लाइमेट चेंज का। तो वो कहती हैं कि पहले जो हमारे पास फसल आती थी तो हम सारा साल खाते थे, अब हमारे पास जो रिसोर्सेज आते हैं उसमें हम ये सोचते हैं कि हम कितना खाना खा सकते हैं और कितना अपने लिए जो है ना वो बचा सकते हैं, ताकि जब अगला साइक्लोन आए तो हम कराची ट्रैवल करके चले जाएं ना। तो दिस इज द काइंड ऑफ पीपल दैट वी डील विद। बट अब उस खातून की वो वल्नरेबिलिटी क्या उन लोगों को पता है जो एक हाई लेवल पे पॉलिसी मेकिंग डिसीजन कर रहे हैं। तो एक चीज जो हमने की, एंड आई फाउंड इट रियली हेल्पफुल for really encouraging women to come to the platforms where they could speak is climate sheroes networks. So उन areas के अंदर जहाँ women were really not able to even have an access to basic mobile phone communication device या किसी village group के अंदर, so we provided them with the platforms where they would go, and we started small. So हम basically bottom approach हमने ऊपर follow की, तो वो district level forums पे they started talking, and they started talking from a gender specific perspective कि अच्छा जी climate change means this to us, and this is what we would like to do. And then they went to the provincial level forums, and eventually they went to the national level. I saw one thing happening. I can't promise that this has like really done a wonder. I saw women empowering. Like I saw women becoming more outspoken and prominent in terms of what they wanted to say. And this turned out to be a good example. And then one of the women from one of the villages in KT Bandar, who had the opportunity to speak to a couple of international forums. So she was speaking in Sindhi, koi narrate kar raha tha, but you could see people's expression changing, understanding. So that's one way that we are trying to really bring in, the perspective of really pushing people. Lekin this is just one aspect of policy advocacy. Then how do we contribute in terms of supporting bottom up approach in the policy making process? So NDCs का हमें पता है, हमें ये भी पता है नापास बनते हैं. So local levels के ऊपर अमूमन sectoral specific vulnerabilities को address करने के लिए लापास बनते हैं, local adaptation plan of actions. अब वो सेक्टर स्पेसिफिक होता है. सो हमने जो कुछ एक्सरसाइजेस की, हमने खासतौर पे केटी बंदर और खारुचान के लिए जो बनाए, सो वी ब्रॉट इन अ वेरी स्पेसिफिक जेंडर का चैप्टर इनटू इट, के जी जेंडर स्पेसिफिक जो है वो क्या चेंजेस है जो इसमें एड्रेस हो. सो दोज लापास ड्राफ्ट वेंट टू द डिस्ट्रिक्ट गवर्नमेंट, और इन द एंड द अल्टीमेट गोल वुड बी कि वो इनकनकेट हो जाए डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल प्लानिंग और बजट एलोकेशन के प्रोसेस के अंदर. सो दैट्स आल्सो अनदर वे दैट वी आर हेल्पिंग. लेकिन अगेन आई थिंक नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज की मैनेजमेंट डिपेंडेंट कम्युनिटीज के ऊपर व्हाट हैज वर्कड वेल विद अस, एंड दैट वाज एग्जैक्टली अ गुड एग्जांपल फॉर अस कि हम मैंग्रोव्स के कंजर्वेशन पे काम कर रहे थे. बट यू कांट जस्ट प्रोटेक्ट मैंग्रोव्स फॉर अ वल्नरेबल कम्युनिटी एंड विद देम, जबकि वो स्ट्रगल करते हैं कि पीने का पानी नहीं है, हेल्थ केयर नहीं है. सो ब्रिंगिंग इन सोल्यूशन व्हाइल यू वर्क विद दीज कम्युनिटीज फ्रॉम अ जेंडर लेंस कुड बी वेरी हेल्पफुल. अब आप उस कम्युनिटी के अंदर एक छोटा सा रेजर्वायर खुदवा रहे हो, and I know that that's like maybe a crudest example you could get, but they are the people who don't even have access to drinkable water. तो वो दरिया, वो जो बारिश का पानी है उस कम्युनिटी में एक सेफ रेजर्वायर में आ रहा है जहाँ आप उसको बेसिक फिल्टर लगा रहे हो. सो वो बीबी मैंग्रोव बचा रही है, but now she doesn't have to leave the village to fetch the water. Sometimes things like that could change the impact. So those are local solutions. But the ultimate idea is always to how do we like really empower these women and these vulnerable communities who are also other groups, that how do we really try to link things, because अभी तक जेंडर डिस्प्रोपोर्शनेट हमारे मुल्क में बहुत हैवी है. एंड आई प्रे कि मे बी नेक्स्ट 20 ईयर्स में जब हम बैठे तो हमें जेंडर स्पेसिफिक चैलेंजेस की बात ना करनी पड़े. विल जस्ट से दैट वी फेस चैलेंज एज अ होल, बट आई थिंक विल टेक अ कपल ऑफ मोर डेकेड्स टू गेट देयर. बट राइट नाउ आई थिंक जेंडर इक्वालिटी एंड इक्विटी इज समथिंग व्हिच नीड्स टू बी मेड पार्ट ऑफ एवरीथिंग, चाहे वो नेचर कंजर्वेशन है, चाहे वो पॉलिसी मेकिंग है, until the time that we get there where we know that that there are voices that are heard, and now we are really able to also integrate them into also policy and planning processes.
Thank you, Humaira. One thing that you said, it really stood out for me. बड़ी खूबसूरत आपने बात की कि हम next time panel में वहाँ से जो औरतें हों वो अपनी grievances भी बता सकें, so that people hearing can also directly understand कि क्या तकलीफें उनको झेलनी पड़ती हैं. So I think just coming, it's been a very informative discussion, a very learning process, for me as well. But Zufin, आपसे मैं last question पूछना चाहती हूँ, वो ये है कि हमने सारी discussion की, about climate impact, about disproportionate impact on women, क्या तकलीफें होती हैं. Do you think that enough is being written about it? इतना लिख रहे हैं कि actually laws change हो, कोई actual notice ले और इस सब को integrate कर पाए?
It is not easy to talk about or write about women vis-a-vis climate change in our part of the world, because it's not always straightforward and easy. And also for them, because they are the change makers, they are bringing about the change, remember that they're also evolving within themselves and getting empowered with increased mobility. Unki mobility increase ho rahi hai. Maybe they are getting access to assets which they never had. Some of them may even be getting educated. So, जब आप जाते हो फील्ड में, so they will tell you कि हमें ज़बान मिल गई है. We got our voices. But theirs is a very risky undertaking, because जब ज़बान मिलती है, so it means that you're challenging the status quo. And when you're doing it, it may not go well with the majority. So when you ask me if enough is written about it, my answer is absolutely not. So the thing is that, but we need to write more. It is, it's in these times, today's times, that we need to give them the floor, and we need to ensure that they are heard, because ek to kam hai, manti hu kam hai, but they are also very invisible. And जैसे मैं जाती हूँ stories करने, और I often chance upon these same very women, and मुझे लगता है कि they have without education, without any economic support, अगर वो इतना they exercise incredible agency to do things differently. And for me, what makes them stand out and what is so inspiring is their positive and optimistic and constructive attitude despite so many barriers. हम तो मतलब हमारी तो life मुझे लगता है बहुत ही easy है compared to them. So मुझे होता है कि हम let's hear them, let's bring them to the table, let's listen to them. यही तो बात है ना, हम उनको सुनते ही नहीं है, उनको क्या कहना है, हम उनको वो importance ही नहीं देते हैं which they deserve. So that's my thing, that we need to stay quiet and listen more.
Bilkul. Afia, would you like to add on to that?
Yes, sure. And I mean, I would like to sort of flip the conversation a bit on a positive note, that there, wherever, like I mentioned earlier, women have been, the hurdles have been removed. They've really shown. If you see the Sindhiani Tehreek, that's a very, very grassroots Tehreek in Sindh, which is from the communities, which is very, very conscious of the natural resources and how they are being exploited, not for their benefit, by others. One is that. The Fisher Folk Forum, in fact, all the fisher communities, amongst them, the women, because of the things that I told you, because they bear a burden, they are staying behind and they have to deal with everything that goes on while the men are away. So they've got very strident voices. Similarly, in the water sector here, at least in Sindh, I do not know about the other provinces, so I will not venture any opinion on that. But in the Sindh Irrigation and Drainage Authority, you have women. But interestingly, when the Sindh water policy was being discussed, and I will quickly just race through this anecdote, when we saw a picture on Twitter of the meeting that was being held, it had only men. And then Simi Kamal, who heads a think tank on water, she also tweeted about it, that how in the world that woman, which is totally, how are women not there in water discourse, which is totally a woman domain, it impacts women more, and they are the managers also. So how can you not have them? And then they ran a campaign, because I had written an article earlier on water, the need to have women at the water table, which became almost like a directory of women working in the water sector. You had scientists, you had academia, you had people in the field, you had journalists who were writing about it. And the Hisar Foundation picked up the women only from Sindh, from that article, and added more because obviously they are in that sphere. And they ran a campaign on social media, and ultimately there was this offer from those people who are holding a dialogue to join them. So basically we gate crashed that meeting, and later on, not only that meeting had few women, but they were there, but then they had a consultation consisting only of women. So there were women who were working in the irrigation sector. There is an area called Akramwa. There the water management is totally a woman's job. It's near Hyderabad. Which area will get water, when, how much, it is totally managed by women. So again, where the hurdles are not there, the women, they know what to do. Because they are rooted to that issue, they can do it. The other is, what she mentioned, like Hamara mentioned, the length the woman travels to fetch water, how much it impacts their physical well-being. And also, interestingly, it also impacts the other social indicators, because the organization I volunteer with, and Zofine has been there to see that project. It is in Kohistan in Sindh. And it was exactly the same, that all we did was excavated the existing depressions which received rainwater, and we excavated them to such a extent that now they had water available near their village for about 8 months. Earlier, it used to finish in about 2 months. And because it was only a woman's job to go fetch water, there was zero girl child literacy over there. Zero. All those schools were there, by the way. The government schools, primary schools were there. So then we introduced a small intervention through a donor whom we don't know, because he was an anonymous donor. He gave us those water wheels, what you call the rollers. We gave them to the families on the promise that their girls are not going to go and fetch water, and they're going to go to schools. So even a small intervention triggers a social change. And like I said, I know that overbearing presence of climate change, it's there, but these inequities are going to be exacerbated if we don't address them in some other creative ways. And they have been, wherever they have been, we've seen a change for the better. So I'll stop here.
Bilkul. I completely agree with you, Afia. And I think my takeaway of this discussion would be that where you're not invited, gate crash.
Yes.
I think that's what needs to be done. But just wrapping up the discussion now. Thank you so much, Zofine. Thank you, Afia. Thank you, Hamera. This has been an enlightening conversation, and I do hope that people watching this, do take away, the facts and information shared by, the three lovely ladies here. And a big thank you to Wow Pakistan for curating this discussion, so that, at least the voice of climate change, climate impact on women is heard and spoken about a lot more than it is right now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Safina.
Thank you for the very good moderation, and thank you.
Yeah,
Wow.
very wonderful, wonderfully done. And thank you, Amne, as well.